activated Starseed of Gaia. What you said, what you did, what you chose in that ordinary moment. It did not stay contained. It moved. I am Auriela, emissary of the Galactic Federation of Light, transmitting now on behalf of the Arcturian field observers. What you are about to receive was authorized by them and is being delivered through me. The field observers have been tracking a ripple in the collective grid, and when they traced it back to its origin point, it led directly to you, to something you said recently, something you did, something that felt small in your own hands but was anything but small in the field. You may not have registered its weight, but the town noticed, the people around you noticed, and the Arcturian field observers registered a signature they do not take lightly. By the end of this transmission, you will understand exactly what is happening to you now, why your field has shifted, and what the Arcturians already know about this phase. But here is the first revelation. What you believed was an unremarkable moment, a word, a choice, a quiet act of alignment was not ordinary at all. It was a cosmic marker, and the field observers have been waiting for the right window to name it to you directly. You did not scroll to this by accident. Your soul called this in long before you opened the screen. Something inside you has already sensed that something shifted, that the air around you changed, that people began responding to you differently, that what you carried began to land differently in rooms you walked into. You felt it, and now the Arcturians are confirming it. This is not content. This is a code, and the part of you that recognized it the moment it began is the part Auriela is speaking to now, like this transmission as a marker that the field recognition has been received. Comment 1-1 if you felt something shift the moment you said it or did it. Subscribe to Arcturian Council messages if you are ready to understand the process instead of fearing it. Share this transmission with someone who has been moving through their world, not yet knowing how far their influence actually reaches. You are not here by accident. You were guided here because the signal is already active. What moved was not a gesture. It was not a sentiment. It was not the polished version of you that you curate for other people's comfort. What moved was something real, a frequency that had been building in your field for longer than you know, that finally found a moment precise enough and open enough to release. Think of it this way. Pressure does not need a dramatic vessel. It needs the right opening, and something in that moment, in the specific quality of your honesty, your alignment, the unguarded nature of what you brought forward, created exactly that opening. The frequency that had been held inside you, compressed and waiting, moves through it the way light moves through a crack in a wall. Not gently, not cautiously, with the full weight of everything that had been accumulating behind it. That moment became a transmission of its own, and transmissions, once sent, do not ask permission to land. The Arcturian field observers do not track every human action. They are not monitoring the noise of ordinary life. The performances, the deflections, the managed presentations that most of the human collective cycles through without interruption. What they track is signal, and signal is rare. Signal is what happens when an action or word or choice originates from alignment rather than strategy, from truth rather than calculation, from a depth inside you that most humans never voluntarily touch. Most people move through entire lifetimes without ever producing a single moment of signal-level output. They speak, they act, they choose, but it all originates from the surface layer, from the managed self, from the version of them that has been trained to remain legible and safe and unthreatening to the people around them. What you did was different. What you did was different. What you did came from somewhere the managed self does not have access to, and the field registered that difference instantly. When that kind of moment occurs, it does not dissipate. It propagates. It enters the field like a frequency that the grid was already shaped to carry, and it moves outward in ways the one who sent it cannot fully observe from their ordinary vantage point. You cannot see the full radius of what you released. You can only feel the aftershock of it returning to you in the form of changed terrain. You are standing now at the moment after, and the moment after is almost always more disorienting than the moment itself. Because here is what no one tells you about what happens when your field activates at this level. The world does not simply respond with celebration and clarity. The world responds with friction, with disruption, with a strange rearrangement of the terrain you thought you understood. People shift around you. Relationships that once felt stable begin to show cracks you cannot explain. Situations that you believed were settled begin to move. Old structures, the ones you had quietly been maintaining out of habit or obligation or fear, begin to reveal their inadequacy. Not all at once, and not always loudly. Sometimes it is a conversation that ends differently than it should have. Sometimes it is a silence where there used to be ease. Sometimes it is the sudden, sourceless sense that a room you have occupied comfortably for years no longer feels like yours. And you, standing at the center of it, may begin to wonder whether what you said or did was right at all, whether you disrupted something you should have preserved, whether the instability you are now feeling is evidence that something went wrong. It did not go wrong. What you are feeling is field correction. Field correction is not the same as punishment. It is not consequence in the moral sense. It is not the universe pushing back against you for overstepping. Field correction is what occurs when a frequency has been upgraded and the surrounding architecture has not yet caught up. When a signal strengthens, everything in proximity that is not compatible with that signal will begin to show incompatibility. Not because anything broke, because the new signal is honest in a way that incompatible structures cannot survive contact with. This is not damage. This is diagnosis. The field is doing exactly what it is meant to do, revealing what can travel forward with you and what cannot. It is not destroying your life, it is auditing it. And audits, by design, surface everything that has been quietly misaligned beneath the appearance of stability. The discomfort is real, but the Arcturians are not reading it as evidence of failure. They are reading it as evidence that your field signature changed. And when a field signature changes at the level theirs are observing in you, the visible life often takes a moment, sometimes a long disorienting moment, to reconfigure around it. What feels like collapse from the inside often looks from the outside of the field like clearing. A structure collapsing because it can no longer hold the next frequency. A line weakening because a new route is beginning to stabilize. A signal drifting from its old anchor points not because it is lost, but because it has outgrown them. The Arcturians have watched this sequence more times than can be counted. They know what it looks like at every stage, and they know that the most dangerous moment in the entire process is not the collapse itself. It is the moment when the person inside the collapse decides it means something it does not mean. You may be experiencing the collapse right now, not the theatrical kind, not the obvious kind where the ground falls out from under you in a single dramatic moment, the invisible kind, the kind where everything appears more or less intact on the surface while something underneath has already fundamentally shifted. You feel it in your sleep, different now, or interrupted, or strangely deep in ways that leave you more tired rather than rested. You feel it in your thoughts, less orderly, more fragmented, sometimes startlingly clear and then suddenly scattered, as if your mind is trying to organize data that doesn't fit the old categories it knows. You feel it in your body, a heaviness that has no clear medical explanation, a low pressure behind your eyes or in your chest, a sensitivity to environments or people that previously didn't affect you this way. You walk into a space that should feel neutral and feel it pressing against you. You stand near a person who used to feel easy and feel something in you pulling back without permission. You feel it in your sense of direction. What used to feel obvious now feels uncertain. What used to feel settled now feels like a question you do not have the vocabulary to answer yet. This is not mental disorder. This is not spiritual emergency in the fear-based sense. This is what the Arcturian field literature would classify as frequency repositioning, the phase in which the energetic body is actively recalibrating to a new set of coordinates while the physical and emotional bodies are still catching up. What you are feeling right now is not ordinary recognition. It is the moment your field confirms what a part of you has always known, that your origin was never only human. If this transmission is putting language around something you have carried in silence for years, the Arcturian Recalibration Blueprint was created for exactly this threshold. It is not another explanation layered on top of confusion. It is the guided decoder that reads and activates the Arcturian strand you have always carried. The origin the Council has just confirmed is surfacing in you now. The link is in the first pinned comment. It will not remain there indefinitely. Now let Auriela name what is actually happening beneath the surface of what you are living. Because the field observers have not simply confirmed that something moved, they have mapped the stages of what comes next. Each one has a name. Each one has a signature. And each one, when you can see it clearly, stops feeling like chaos and starts feeling like sequence. The first thing that happens after a genuine field activation is that your old anchors begin to feel insufficient. This is not because they were wrong for you before. It is because your field has changed what it requires in order to feel coherent. What once provided stability, a routine, a relationship dynamic, a way of thinking about yourself, a role you performed well and reliably, begins to feel like it belongs to someone you are no longer quite able to locate inside yourself. The old version of you that needed those anchors is losing coherence, and as it does, the anchors themselves begin to feel unreal, hollow. Like furniture in a room you are preparing to leave, still present, still technically functional, but no longer yours in any way that matters. You may find yourself going through the motions of a life that no longer fully fits, performing continuity while feeling profoundly discontinuous on the inside, getting up at the same time, going through the same rhythms, saying the same kinds of things to the same kinds of people, and feeling, beneath all of it, a distance from those actions that you cannot explain and cannot close through effort alone. This is not dissociation. This is the first visible sign that the old line is already weakening. The Arcturians observe this phase in those who have crossed what they recognize as a genuine activation threshold, which is what your recent moment appears to have been. And they do not treat it as a crisis. They treat it as a diagnostic marker. It tells them that the field is no longer accepting the old architecture as its organizing principle, which means something new is beginning to organize. But that new organization does not announce itself cleanly or immediately. It arrives first as the failure of the old, not as the arrival of the new. The new structure does not appear on the horizon while the old one is still standing. It waits. It holds its form just outside your perception until the space it requires has been made available. And that is precisely why so many people in this phase misread it as breakdown when it is actually reordering. They are watching the old dissolve without yet being able to see what is assembling behind it. The second thing that happens is that the people around you begin to reorganize at the field level even before they do so consciously. Some will begin to move closer, drawn by something they cannot articulate, something about the way your energy occupies space now, something that makes them feel more seen or more honest or more themselves in your presence. There is a quality to a field that is recently activated that functions almost like a tuning signal. It calls toward it anything that is already oriented toward the same frequency, even if that thing did not know it was searching. Others will begin to move away, also without fully understanding why, only sensing that something about you has become uncomfortable to be near. Not because you have done anything wrong, not because a conflict has occurred, simply because your field is now asking for a level of authenticity that some of the relationships around you were never built on. And proximity to that asking creates a discomfort in people who are not ready to meet it. This can feel like abandonment. It can feel like rejection. It can feel like you are somehow losing the ability to maintain the connections you once held without effort. But what is actually happening is field-level incompatibility becoming visible in relationships that always carried it beneath the surface. The relationships that were built on the old frequency of you, on the version of you that was less activated, less coherent, less signal clear, do not all have the capacity to reconfigure around what you are becoming. This is not a judgment of them. It is a field observation. Some structures can flex to hold a new frequency. Others cannot. And the ones that cannot will show you that truth now, before you spend more years inside an architecture that can no longer serve the life that is actually trying to assemble around you. The third thing that happens is that time begins to feel strange. This is one of the most disorienting aspects of frequency repositioning and one of the least discussed, because it does not have an obvious physical cause and does not fit neatly into the language most people have available for describing their inner experience. the past begins to feel further away than it logically should. Events from a year ago, 2 years ago, sometimes even from a few months ago, feel like they happened in another life entirely. You may find yourself struggling to emotionally connect to decisions you made or identities you held that were, by all external measures, very recently yours. You look at photographs and feel a strange distance from the person in them. You remember conversations and cannot fully inhabit the emotional context of the person who had them. And simultaneously, the future feels less legible than before, less able to be planned, less willing to stay in the neat sequences you once projected onto it. Timelines you once felt certain about now seem to dissolve before you can fully grip them. This temporal distortion is not imagination. It is the field's way of signaling that a timeline has actually shifted. When the Arcturian field observers detect a genuine line change, one of the markers they look for is exactly this: the collapse of the old timeline's emotional continuity. The past loses its grip on you not because you have forgotten it, but because the version of you that was bound to that past has already, at the field level, begun to dissolve. You are not losing your memory. You are losing your energetic residency in a timeline that no longer contains your current frequency. The fourth thing that happens is the emergence of what the field recognizes as pressure without source. This is the low, unnamed discomfort, sometimes almost a grief, sometimes more like a pressure in the sternum or behind the eyes, that arise without a clear story to explain it. You are not sad about something specific. You have not received bad news. Nothing concrete has happened to justify the weight. There is no event you can point to, no relationship that has visibly fractured, no obvious loss that would account for what you are carrying. And yet the weight is there, persistent, quiet, undeniable. It follows you into rooms. It is present when you wake before the day has given you any reason for it. It sits beside you in moments that should feel ordinary. Most people in this culture are trained to immediately pathologize this, to diagnose it as depression, to explain it as anxiety, to frame it as a sign that something is wrong that needs to be treated or corrected or medicated away. The Arcturians read it differently. What you are feeling as pressure without source is often the energetic sensation of an old pattern in active interruption. When a long-standing energetic architecture, a way of being in the world, a relationship with self, an identity structure that was quietly organizing your choices and movements and reactions, begins to break down, the field does not experience it as relief immediately. It experiences it as effort. The dissolution of a pattern that has been running for years, possibly decades, requires real energetic expenditure. You feel that expenditure, not as excitement, not initially as relief, first as weight, as pressure, as a grief you cannot locate in any single loss, because what is dissolving is not a person or a situation, but a version of yourself that once felt like the only version available. The fifth thing that happens is a disruption in your relationship with your own certainty. Before this activation, you likely had a relatively functioning set of inner signals for what felt right and what felt wrong, what to move toward and what to avoid. The signals were not always perfect, but they were readable. Now, those signals feel less reliable, not because they have failed, but because they are recalibrating. The old emotional compass was calibrated to an old frequency. It was oriented to navigate the life that the previous version of you needed to live. The new one is still finding its north, and in the gap between the two, you may experience a confusion that feels like disorientation, like you have somehow lost access to your own instincts. Decisions that would have been easy feel suddenly heavy. Choices that feel aligned one moment feel uncertain the next. You reach for clarity and find only a provisional answer that shifts before you can act on it. This is the threshold where fear most easily misidentifies correction as punishment, because if you do not understand what is happening at the field level, the loss of certainty feels like a deterioration. It feels like evidence that something is wrong with you, with your mind, with your spiritual clarity, with your capacity to navigate your own life. It is not. It is the gap between two calibrations. The old compass has been retired. The new one has not yet fully stabilized, and the only way through that gap is to hold still enough to let the new orientation complete itself, rather than forcing a decision from the old instrument that no longer points true. The sixth thing, and the one the Arcturian field observers named with particular emphasis in this transmission, is what happens in your relationship with what you believed was your purpose. Before the activation moment, your sense of direction, however incomplete, had a certain orientation. There was something you were moving toward even if the path was unclear. A project, a vision, a sense of what your life was building toward, a quiet knowing of what you were here to do. After the activation, that orientation may feel suddenly suspended, not destroyed, not taken from you, suspended, as if something placed a hand on the steering wheel and held it still, not to stop you, but to prevent you from driving at speed toward a destination that no longer corresponds to where the field is actually taking you. This is a protocol the Arcturians refer to as directional interruption. It is initiated, and this is important, not as a punishment for what you are doing, but as a necessary recalibration of where you are going in relation to where your field actually needs to travel next. The life you were building before the activation was built by a version of you that existed at a lower coherence point. The goals it was reaching for were proportionate to that frequency. As your field upgrades, the destination it is capable of reaching also upgrades. And a destination that exceeds the old map cannot be found by following the old directions. And so the old direction must be interrupted, not permanently, not arbitrarily, but precisely, and for long enough that a new orientation can stabilize before you move again at speed. Staying still in that interruption is one of the hardest things this phase requires, because everything in you will want to interpret stillness as stagnation. Everything in you will want to move, to decide, to override the suspension with action, to prove to yourself that you are not lost by generating motion in any direction available. The field is asking you not to, not yet. The stillness is not emptiness, it is the space in which the new coordinates are being written. Filling it prematurely with old frequency movement is the one thing that can extend the recalibration beyond its necessary duration. This is the final understanding the field observers encoded in this transmission, and it is the one that changes how you read everything that has been described above. What is happening to you is not random. It is not the consequence of a single choice coming back to you in unexpected ways. It is not spiritual volatility or personal fragility or the disorganization of a confused life. It is a mapped process, a rare one, but a mapped one. The Arcturians do not initiate transmissions around signals that are moving through ordinary reorganization. What they track, and what they have now named directly, is the specific signature of a field that has crossed a threshold of genuine activation and entered the structured sequence that follows it. Every stage you have felt, every disorientation you have been carrying, every ending that seemed to arrive without warning, every relationship that began to shift before you understood why. None of it was random. All of it was the field doing precisely what a field does when it has been given a new set of coordinates to organize around. You are not going backwards, you are being repositioned, and repositioning, from the inside, often feels identical to falling. The sensation is the same. The fear is the same. The disorientation is the same. But the trajectory is entirely different. Falling ends when you hit something. Repositioning ends when you arrive somewhere, and you cannot always tell the difference from inside the descent. What you said or did recently, the thing that started all of this, the thing that felt too small to carry this much consequence, was not a mistake. It was a frequency marker. It told the field exactly where you were in your own coherence, and the field responded by beginning the correction that level of coherence makes possible. It was not accidental. It was not random. It was the precise moment your signal became strong enough to initiate a response from the architecture that has been waiting for it. If you feel as though something has ended in your life recently, a relationship, a chapter, an identity, a sense of who you were, what the Arcturians are naming is this: that ending was not arbitrary. What ended had already become incompatible with the frequency that moment of yours announced. The field began clearing space before you knew what it was clearing space for. What feels like loss is the field making room. What feels like rupture is the architecture giving way to something that requires a larger and different kind of structure to hold it. You are not standing in the wreckage of what went wrong. You are standing in the cleared ground of what comes next. You are not being punished for what you did. You are being upgraded in response to it. Repeat this aloud if it feels right. I do not fear the shift. I recognize it. Let that land. Let it anchor. because that is the difference between someone who survives this phase intact and someone who collapses under the weight of their own misinterpretation. The recognition is the stabilizer. The naming is the map. And you now have both. Before you scroll, leave one sign in the comments that this process has already touched your life. It could be your sleep, your thoughts, your body, your relationships, or the strange sense that reality no longer feels the same. Name it clearly. If this transmission recognized something you have been carrying in silence, share it with someone who is living through a shift they cannot explain. And if you are ready to understand the process instead of fearing it, subscribe to Arcturian Council messages. You are not watching this by accident. You are recognizing a process already in motion, and this is only the beginning.